Hello, students. Today we're going to talk about the IEP, and I am holding up a can of Spam. How does Spam relate to the IEP? Well, in our present levels of performance that we're going to talk about, when we want to understand the student and we collect data or report on the student, there are certain things that we want to know. We want to know about the social development of the student, that's the S, the physical development, P, A, academic achievement, and M, management needs. So these are 4 dimensions in present levels of performance that we also see in our IEP. So remember, SPAM. So let's take a look and see how this works out with our IEP. Okay. Okay. So this is the New York State recommended form for an IEP. So once this is filled out, this is the student's individualized education program. And so the information on this is extremely important. So first we begin with the school district's information. So we have the name of the school district here, the student's name, their date of birth, their local ID, and then disability classification. So based on our testing and based on our assessments, we have determined that the student has one of the 13 categories of disability. That is the only thing that can go here. Can a disability classification be absenteeism? No, that's not a classification. Can it be an unmotivated learner? That is not a classification. Student who is a low achiever, that's not a classification. So it specifically has to be one of those 13 categories of disability. Then we have the projected date the IEP is to be implemented, when it starts. So we have that date, and within a year, an annual review, we then meet to assess whether or not the program, the individualized education program, is working for the student. So let's go down to our present levels of performance. And again, remember, dun, 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 spam. Okay, so at the very top here, the documentation that we need, we have evaluation results. So these are the assessments, some of the assessments we've talked about in this class. So we have intelligence testing, we have testing of adaptability. So we might have the WISC, or we might have the Vineland. We may have tests of academic achievement. We might have different types of scales if we think that the student has behavioral. In the behavioral domain, we might have the BASC, or we might have the Connors scale. So there's various evaluations that would be here. That was from the individualized evaluation plan, so that when we started to test the student, we take all the tests and we put them here. It could be a self, it could be a speech and language test. So it goes here. And then we also can put in the performance on state and district-wide assessments here in our documentation. Next up, we have our academic achievement. So in our academic achievement, and functional performance and learning characteristics of the students, we always start off with the student's strengths, preferences, and interests. So we look at that, and then we put the characteristics of the students, and all students have strengths. And then we also ask the parent, what are some of their concerns in regards to academic, developmental, and functional needs that the student has. So we might have some and the parents might have. So this is why here we include consideration of the student's needs that are of concern to the parent. So here in our academic achievement, functional performance, and learning characteristics, we make sure we write down the strengths and also the needs. We do the same thing for social development. So here in the social development, it's the degree and quality of the student's relationships with peers and adults, feelings about self, and social adjustment to school and community environments. So we look at the students' strengths. What are their strengths? We write them down. And of course, what are the students' needs? And again, including some considerations that the parent might have. Next up, physical development. So again, we look at the degree and quality of the student's motor and sensory development, health, vitality, and the physical skills or limitations which pertain to the learning process. So are there sensory or physical components that impact the learning process? So again, we look at the student's strengths, and then we look at the physical development needs of the students, including consideration of parents that are of concern to parents. Then we have management needs. And so when we look at management needs, it's not so much about the student managing themselves, but it's about the nature and degree to which environmental and human or material resources are needed to address the needs identified above. So if the student has these needs, so we look at these needs. So if the student has an academic need, social development need, a physical development need, what can we offer? What is needed here to help these items here? So environmental and human or materials. So the student needs a technological device to communicate with others. Student needs a wheelchair or needs a way to help with mobility. So what are some of the things that are needed to manage the other items up here in this present levels of performance? So these are all connected. Management need is connected to these. Okay, so if you have a student who has behavioral disorder, to put in here, and let's say the student name is Kim. Kim needs to count to 3 and learn how to calm herself down. That is not what this is really asking. So maybe in order to calm herself and help with self-injurious behavior, Kim needs an aid is needed in crisis prevention, or something of that nature. So that's really what the management need is asking. Asking from this form. This is what it is asking. Okay. So the next part of the IEP is effects of student needs on involvement and progress in the general education curriculum, or for a preschool student, effective student needs on participating in appropriate activities. So here you make a statement about how the needs above affects the involvement in general education. So Next, we have student needs relating to special factors. So here, does the student need strategies including positive behavioral intervention supports and other strategies to address behaviors that impede the student's learning or that of others? So this is something based on the student, and there will be a more than one person fills this out. Usually there is a team, so we talk about the team, and they are discussing, talking, what does the student need? So does the student need that? And does the student need a behavioral intervention plan? So if the student needs a behavioral intervention plan, we put yes, and then we make a statement about the plan, or just generally what the plan would be addressing. For a student with limited English proficiency, does he or she need a special education service to address his or her language need as they relate to the IEP? So if the student has limited English proficiency, we would mark that. If the student does not, it would be not applicable. You can also see this IEP tutorial or an IEP tutorial given by New York State. The one that I'm doing now is a little bit not as in depth as New York State, but hitting the high points, and I'm going to show you an example. If you feel like you would like to have more depth of information, or understand why certain things are on the IEP, I will leave the link for the New York State tutorial in this module. Okay, so for a student who is blind or visually impaired, does he or she need instruction in Braille? So you answer that based on the student. Does the student need a particular device or service to address his or her communication needs? And so you would answer that. Does the student need an assistive technology device and or services? If yes, does the committee recommend that the device be used in the student's home? If the device needs to be used in the student's home, then the district will provide that device for the student. So here we have measurable post-secondary goals. And so beginning not later than the first IEP to be in effect when the student is age 15 and at a younger age if determined appropriate. So definitely by 15, we need to have a measurable post-secondary goals, where we are talking about long-term goals for living, working, and learning as an adult. So we're planning for that student. Some students, as it says here, they may be younger, and we have some post-secondary goals that we're already working on. So we need to think about education and training, employment, independent living skills. So perhaps we have a student who may be college bound, community college bound, or we might have a student who is bound for culinary school or for a trade, or a student who wants to be in a independent living group home. So there are so many different paths and pathways for students, but we need to plan for them and help the students transition from school to adult life. And here we have transition needs. So in consideration of present levels of performance, transition service needs of the student that focus on the student's course of study, taking into account the student's strengths, preferences, and interests as they relate to transition from school to post-school activities. And so we would fill that out for the student. Okay, so now we go to the measurable annual goals. And so the following goals are recommended to enable the student to be involved in and progress in the general education curriculum, address other educational needs that result from students' disability, and prepare the student to meet his or her post-secondary goals. So these goals here, okay. So these are the annual goals. So in these goals, we write down what the student will be expected to achieve by the end of the year in which the IEP is in effect. So our goals are written in more of a broad stroke of what they will achieve at the end of the year. There is a criteria, so a measure to determine if the goal has been achieved. So we have to have a criteria. So think even like lesson plan, we have a criteria. It's the same thing here, a criteria to know if they achieved it, the method, how it will be measured, and a schedule of when it will be measured. I'm going to show you an example of all of this in just a few minutes. Reporting progress to parents. So when are we going to report progress to students about the annual goals? In many cases, this may be quarterly, it may be with report cards. In a lot of cases, I've seen it with report cards, which is quarterly. So once it's on the IEP and it says we are going to report this, it needs to be done with consistency and in a systematic way. So that's why oftentimes it is reported with the report cards. So now this section, alternate section for students who IEPs will include short-term instructional objectives and or benchmarks. So this section, and it's also required for preschool students and for school-age students who meet eligibility criteria for taking the New York State alternate assessment. So what does that mean? So this section is required for preschool, and they're short-term goals. And there also this section is required for those students who will be participating in New York State alternate goals. So if a student is in general education and they're taking the New York State assessments, and it has been determined that they are not a part of the alternate assessments, this section is not filled out for them. So let me highlight to take the New York State alternate assessments. So the alternate assessments are not assessments that lead to a local high school diploma. So this is a different path and would lead to a different type of diploma or outcome. So when you're looking at the students, this right here, as soon as you look at an IEP and you read this section, you can pretty much tell the student is either in preschool or they are a student who is participating in the alternate assessments. And again, how is this going to be reported to the parents? Okay, so after we finish with our goals, we then go into the actual programs and services. So here we have our special education program. So there are a list of different program options that will be in this module. And so we think about those programs where there's integrated co-teaching, it could be self-contained, the service delivery recommendations. So you see this asterisk, we move down here and it says identify, if applicable, class size, maximum student to staff ratio, language if other than English, group or individual services, direct or indirect consultant teacher services, or other service delivery recommendations. So some of our services, for example, there's a teacher consultant that can consult the teacher, but there's also times when that person may work with the student. So we need to be clear on the recommendations here so that we agree on exactly what's supposed to happen. So we have that, how often, duration of the sessions, and location where the service will be provided and when this service will begin. We have related services such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, resource room, all other types of related services, supplementary aids and services, program modifications, accommodations that we recommend. If we recommend assistive technology devices, that would go there. And if we're recommending support for school personnel on behalf of the student, that information would go here. So perhaps school personnel, everyone needs a training in a particular area because those who are working with the student may need to know this pertinent information. So that could be a variety of things. And these are the services that would be implemented for the student. Okay, so now we come down here, 12-month service and program. So if the student is eligible to receive special education services and or programs during July and August. So students who are required 12-month program are students who have more needs. And so they are 12-month in a 12-month service program. The school year is 9 months, 180 days. Yeah, I think 180 days. And so those students whose needs can be met, there are times when those students go to a school run summer program where it's considered more of enrichment and it's under general education, like AIS type of a program, whereas this is 12 months. The student, it is on the IEP, so they are there for the full 12 months. So it's a different option in services, and it's more restrictive. So the more a student is away from their typical peers, the more restrictive their program becomes. So when we talk about LRE, a lot of times we think, oh, this will be great. We could give the student all these services. We'll give them counseling, and we'll give them OT, and we'll give them PT, and it wouldn't hurt if they had a resource room, and we're going to put them in self-contained, and we're going to give them all these services. But the more you give, the more restrictive it becomes, because the more you're removing them from typical peers. So we keep that in mind when we have our committee meetings, that we serve the student in the least restrictive environment. Okay, so then if it is 12 months, then we have to fill this part out of what services, program, location, where it begins. Their location is also important because there are times when students do receive their IEP services, or they're not in district, so there are other places. So we might indicate that sometimes in different places in the IEP, but especially at the end, and I'll show you where that comes up. So testing accommodations. If you have a student that has needs, then they very well will need testing accommodations. So let's just read this. It says, to be completed for preschool children only if there is an assessment program for non-disabled preschool children. Individual testing accommodations specific to the student's disability and needs to be used consistently by the student in the recommended educational program and in the administration of district-wide assessments of student achievement and in accordance with department policy, state assessments of student achievement. So whatever testing accommodations we have here, there are testing accommodations that the student has to use all the time. We can't just give them testing accommodations for state test or high stakes test only. They are to be used consistently for all tests of a particular type. So here we have the condition, the test, the conditions here. So we have what the testing accommodation is here, the conditions, and then over here, the implementation recommendation, identify the amount of extended time, type of setting, etc., specific to testing accommodation. So whether it be a separate location, time and a half, all of those things would be put in that particular area. So going back when we talked about transition, in this part, if the student is of age or of, if we feel like before they're 18, before they're 15, and we need to set up transition activities, this is the section where we would write that down. So we would needed activities to facilitate the students' movement from school to post-school activities. So do they need instruction? What type of related services they need? A community experience, the development of education and other post-school adult living objectives. So that information would be here if they need acquisition of daily living skills, if we need to teach them daily living skills, that information would be here, and then we would have the school district or agency that is responsible for facilitating this part or facilitating these activities. Next, we have the question. Participating in state and district-wide assessment. So here we have to put down if the student will or will not participate in state and district assessments. So let's look here. The student will participate in the same state and district-wide assessments of student achievement that are administered to general education students. So if the student is not alternate assessment and the student is going to receive a high school diploma, that's the goal, then the student would participate in the same assessments in New York State. So we're just going to focus on New York State for now. Or we have the other option. The student will participate in an alternate assessment on a particular state or district-wide assessment of student achievement, and then identify the alternate assessment. So the majority of students that our programs serve, so many students now are taking the state and district-wide assessments. So we have some students who are in other schools and who are many are not in the local schools right now. Not a huge amount that are taking the alternate assessment. It seems to be the paradigm shift that as many students that can take those district assessments are encouraged to go in that direction. And so these numbers have changed over time. So that is a course in of itself. So for this, without getting into too sidetracked or into too much discourse, for now, there is a distinction between the two. And so we have to say whether or not. And in your committee, if the student is at a local school, there's a high probability that they will be participating in the state and district assessments. Okay, participation with students without disabilities. So here, let's see what it says. It says removal from the general education environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability is such that even with the use of supplementary aids and services, education cannot be satisfactorily achieved. So for the preschool student, explain the extent, if any, to which the student will not participate in appropriate activities with age-appropriate non-disabled peers. So they're asking us to state that. So percent of the school day or in particular activities where the student cannot participate. And for the school-age student, also explain the extent that the student will not participate in regular class, extracurricular, and other non-academic activities. Percentage of the school day. So this could really, there's such a wide range of scenarios and situations for this that I was going to give one, but I'm going to wait till we look at the example so I don't confuse you. Exemption from language other than English diploma requirement, yes or no, and the committee determines whether or not the student's disability adversely affects his or her ability to learn a language, and recommends that the student be exempt from a language other than English. So there's a requirement where students need to take a LOT requirement where students will take a language and they can be exempt from that if it is deemed needed by the committee. And so here we have special transportation. Will the district be providing special transportation? None. Student needs special transportation, so we write as follow, or student needs transportation to and from special classes or programs at another site. So we have to fill this out. And placement recommendation at the very end, we state where all of this is going to happen. So it may happen at the local public school, the home school, not meaning homeschool at home, but the home school, the home zone school, local public school. It could be BOCES, residential care. So this placement recommendation is asking where's all of this going to happen? So where question. So that's what goes here. So that's the form. And I want to show you an example of a student's IEP. Let's see if I can find it. Here we go. Let me make sure that you are seeing what I'm seeing. So I'm going to check it and make sure that you and I are on the same page. We are. Okay. So this is an IEP that of a student. And so here we see in the beginning at the top, we have the information, the school district information. This happens to be a IEP from a student who goes to Valley Stream Central High School District. And here we have the information like we saw on the form. So we have the student's name and there's more information here. The diploma type expected is a Regents diploma. There's some special alerts here. So the student is currently prescribed medication for a seizure disorder. So the New York State form is recommended, but there are companies that actually help do IEP, so they're computerized. So this happened to be a computerized IEP program that this and many other districts use. So they don't fill in all of the information in by hand, or the same way that they would do that New York State form. So we have a little bit more information, but when it comes to the essential part, you will see the overlap. That is pretty much the same information. And so we have the ID. All the students have an ID. Here's some information about the student's native language. And so here, this is the summary notes. These are all summary notes from the IEP. So here is the projected start date of the IEP. Here's the end date. So it's within the same school year, so it's within a year. And then here is the student's program. So in this IEP that was developed, the student received special class for English, math, social studies, science. So for the major part of the student's academic day, they are in what's called a 15-1+1. So there are 15 students, one teacher, and one aide in the class. The student also receives counseling services in a small group. There are 5 students to 1 adult. So there's 5 students in the counseling group. The student also receives occupational therapy individually. And in addition to this counseling, the student also receives individual counseling. So here you can see how many times, 1 time a day, 42 minutes, twice a week, 32 minutes, and here is the location. So here it is at Memorial Junior High School, is where all of this takes place. The classroom, there's a therapy room, and a counseling room. So I'm going to bypass the notes. These are excellent notes for this student. And the reason why there was this particular meeting, which wasn't an annual review, it was a parent requested meeting, and all of the notes for the why and the meeting are there. So let's look at the IEP. So here is what we saw on the form that we saw. So here it is in this computerized version, which is a little bit different, program that is different. I think it's IEP Direct. But again, it's the same dimensions, or the same information that we need to provide. Student name, date of birth, disability classification. So here it is here. The student has a learning disability, the projected date, and here in the present levels of performance are the evaluations. So let's look at what we have. So we have a teacher report, classroom observations, an education eval, psych eval. And these are all the evaluations, the test results. So it gives us all of this information. So we put it down here. Just state and district-wide assessments, none were put here. The student is 8th grade, and perhaps they did not have that information. So it was not included in this report. So let's take a look at the academic achievement. So present levels. So in the present levels of performance, this is broken down by study skills, reading, writing, and math. So in all of the major areas, this IEP talks about the student and their strengths and needs in these main areas. So when we look at social development, we have some information about the student's strengths, and the student's needs. And here for physical development, the student has occupational therapy. And so Nikki demonstrates a fluctuating grasp on writing utensils, difficulty writing with proper size, spacing, and alignment. Decreased ocular motor control for visual tracking leads to difficulty maintaining visual spatial placement during close and far point copying tasks. At times, she complains of fatigue during writing. So in her physical development, these are some of the issues. And then here are in this area, her strengths, and then some areas that she needs to work on. Okay, so now let's look at management needs. So here, Nikki has significant delays and requires small teacher to student ratio program with minimal distractions in order to progress academically. She requires a structured environment. So you see how the management speaks to all of these different things that came before it. And so here's another example. As we go further, when we look at the special factors, so does she need strategies, including behavioral support? No. So Nikki does not need any behavior intervention plans or behavioral supports. She is not blind. She does not use Braille, and she does not need a communication device. So let's look at her annual goals. So with her annual goals, there is reading, writing, math, social, emotional, her motor skills. And her motor skills would be the related services and why she needs the related services, and social, emotional, behavioral. We saw that she has counseling. So this is the goal that is related to that. And then here, when we look at the reading, the writing, and the math, those are core areas that are across content areas. And so were her goals that would be addressed in various content areas. So here we have the goal, the criteria, 85% over a week, the method, teacher, device, test, and worksheets, and then when will it be measured? By the end of each marking period. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down, and from her goals. And so we see here reporting progress to parents. There'll be 4 written progress reports during the school year. And then this is what her program looks like. Again, we saw a little bit of this in the summary. And she is not a 12-year student, 12-month student, and she will participate in district assessments. As far as participating with students without disabilities, she was exempt from that because there is nothing outstanding that her being in the smaller class is not what they're asking here. They're asking if there's something else, another reason why the student would not be what other reasons why they would not be with their non-disabled peers. And then she also got the exemption here. So the committee has determined that the student's disability adversely affects her ability to learn a language, and recommends that she is exempt. So on this form here, in this one, we did not have her transition plan in this one, in this meeting, in this IEP, because she's probably does not have the age. Yes, she does not have the age. And so when they did this, she probably was not 15. She might not have been 15. And so for this IEP, they determined not to do the transition plan yet. So here, Okay. Okay, so these are her services. This is what it looks like. Okay. So what, and then you see here, special transportation and the placement recommendation, home public school district. So that's what I was trying to say. I kept saying local zone school, but it's home public school district. So she goes to school in her district. Okay, so information that we can get from this IEP is so much information. So as teachers, when we are looking to help students, the first thing that we can get in their present levels of performance, this testing information gives me an idea of where the student is functioning. So I can see here in her intelligence scale that there seems to be her perceptual reasoning is in the second percentile, where her processing speed is in the 27th percentile, and her working memory is in the second percentile. So right here, I see, wow, there are some things here that is going to affect her in the classroom, and definitely with her working memory, how she processes things, her verbal comprehension, 27th percentile, not as bad as perceptual reasoning, which is the second percentile. So I'm getting information from here. I'm looking at the Woodcock-Johnson test of achievement, and I'm seeing that her academic applications, she has a 79 standard score. So that's struggling, but look at her academic fluency. Her standard score is 110, which is pushing her almost into average range. Her academic skills are not too far off, but then applying it. So do you see how she's in the third percentile here, but for her academic skills, she's in the 20th percentile? I really, the percentiles are helpful. The standard scores are helpful as well. So her broad math is 93 standard score. And she's in the 33rd percentile. So from here, I can see her areas that she needs to work on, but there's some strengths in here. She's stronger in some things than others. So I know that her sentence writing fluency, her sentence reading fluency, her math facts fluency, these are all areas that are very well intact. But then something such as memorizing items, that's much weaker. So I'm looking here and I'm getting information. Then when I look here in the academic achievement, I can see clearly, because they're telling you what she's an extremely hardworking student. It's telling me clearly what her strengths and what her interests are. And here in this very well written IEP, clearly for reading, what are some of the issues for this student? So the information is right there, and it's very helpful. So the IEP, we can get information, of course, more than just the goals. The whole document is extremely helpful. Her social development, it is so important to know that she has an OT issue and that she has visual spatial issues. So we're going to make her copy things off the board unnecessarily. And no, we're not going to do that. We're going to make sure that she has a copy of the notes. We're going to do some visual things for her. She's not going to be writing a lot of things because those are areas that are very difficult for her. So we can help her with that. And moving down, more information. And then of course, here we have goals. And so when you look at the goals give you some information as to, okay, so when she's presented with narrative and or informational text from content areas, she will cite the textual evidence that most strongly supports an analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inference drawn for the text. So she needs to work on textual clues. So for her writing, these goals are very clear and helpful. And then we have, of course, her testing accommodations. Let's see, her testing accommodation. So she has extended time on all tests 2.0. So she has double time. And she also has the test administrated and with minimal distraction, answers recorded in the test book, no Scantron, visual perceptual, right? So no Scantron, because if you do a Scantron, you have visual perceptual issues, you probably will be marking in the wrong places. Directions read to the students and directions simplified. Test passages, questions, items, multiple choice read to the student. And here we have on tests that do not measure reading comprehension. So if we're not measuring reading comprehension, then we need to read it to her because we're measuring something else. So that's why that's important for that student. Okay, so we have gone through the IEP form and an example. So what you are going to do is you are going to create an IEP for a student based on some information that I am going to give you, and you can use this video to help you, and also the link to the New York State tutorial. And I also have an additional tutorial that will help you if you need it. So this will be great. It will be fun. And this exceptional IEP that was donated to this class by the parent as an exemplar of an IEP, which I hope you appreciate because this is a really well-written IEP with a lot of information. And from the parent's perspective, the parent who is a special education teacher, who has a daughter with special needs, read this IEP and said, "Oh no, this is good stuff. I want to donate it to your class, and you can use this as an example of an IEP." So I am very appreciative of that parent. So this is what an IEP looks like. If you haven't seen one, this is a good one, very detailed. And so that ends the tutorial, and then we will go on to our next part in this very exciting assignment. So thank you very much.